The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, Angelman community, families and friends. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Luke Rosen. I know many of you guys, and I have the honor and the pleasure of being able to work with the families and the community, the foundation. So thank you guys all for being here. I want to introduce two other people who you know very well. Jeremy Levin, who's the CEO of OVID, and Amit Rakit, who's the president. And Jeremy's going to speak a little bit, and then Amit will speak to our programs and answer some questions. So thank you very much for being here. Over to you, Jeremy.
Hey, thanks, Luke, and hi, everybody. It's kind of tough today to talk, and I'm also excited. It's tough because all of us, myself, yourselves, are facing things that we've never seen before. And quite frankly, at times I find myself asking, how can I really cope with this? And by that I mean, you have COVID, and then you have the incredible social dislocation that's occurring at the same time. So I want to tell you that I've thought a lot about this. I spent a lot of time working with people. I've just published a book about it with Luke, is actually one of the authors in it. He's done a fantastic essay. He talked about rare diseases and what this COVID crisis means for rare diseases. But I think what's really important to me is to tell you that in this whole process, the resolve I had in starting OVID and the commitment I had to helping the families and the communities has only become stronger. I've talked to families with 3 kids, all of who've got little angels with them. And I know how it means when your helper doesn't come home, when it can no longer come to your home. You can't take them to the clinics, you can't get them to the physio, etc. To me, I found inspiration in those people who told me about their experiences. Because again, whatever we do, whatever OVID does, whatever any company does, is like nothing compared to what you do. And so all I can say to you is, years ago, there were no companies. We got into it, or I think there was one just thinking about it. Now there's a lot. Doesn't matter to me. There's one mission: find the medicines that will help, and eventually, we can have the aspiration that you'll see a cure. Please, I don't use that word ever because it's very uncomfortable for me. There are very few cures. A cure means one thing and then it's done. But what we can do, and I do have hope with, we have tremendous hope that all the medicines that are being developed will eventually, in combination, have a tremendous effect on the disorder and the underlying pathophysiology, the underlying mechanisms of things that are going on. So for me, I've got more hope now than I had 5 years ago. And you know I was committed then, you know that OVID was committed. And on the day, on March 11, when we said, let's experiment closing the office, but let's make sure, 100% sure, that our clinical trials could continue, would deliver the medicine. I thought to myself, well, I'll be back in the office in about like a week's time. And here I am, not. I'm still out. Our entire company is virtual. Every single one of them is committed to making sure that Neptune delivers this year, are committed to ensuring that we deliver to you our promise. And we are just totally determined on that. You have no idea how determined we are in it. So I do want you to take away from this, from me, that never have we been more determined, never have we been more committed. And also, I look with great optimism at the data we will generate. I'm looking forward to that. Neptune, Amit's going to talk to you in a second about Neptune, but it's much more. We've had Neptune, we've had STARS before that, and thank you very much those who even did the phase 1 PK studies early on. This is all now set in place. With good luck, with good fortune and good data, we will hopefully have the first therapeutic in this area. And then as we watch the others, we'll have a pill that you take at night. If others are coming along and they've developed newer therapies, which are things that relate to giving you an injection into your spinal cord and having gene type therapies or genetic medicines, this is fantastic. This is really good. It will take time, but my guessing is like every other situation over the last 20 years of research, what we've demonstrated is that when those new therapies come along, in general, what has happened is they work as combinations with the first therapy. So our job has been to work with you. We admire everything that you've done. You've been incredibly brave to work with us, but we're there. This is the year. We're not going anywhere. Neptune is going to come in, as we said, the fourth quarter of this year. We'll know what that data looks like. So we're optimistic. I want to express my admiration to you. I want to express my thanks to you. And I'm always open, always. One last thing. When we started this, I guarantee you nobody in the White House had ever heard of Angelmans. I promise you, I told them. I can also assure you nobody in the Senate knew about this. I promise you, there was only one person who thought about it, a senator who did have a child who was an Angelman's, with an Angelman's child, but we spoke to many others. And then the great delight I had was that yesterday somebody wrote about what we were doing, and it went to 27 million people all around the world. They know that OVID is committed to Angelman. They know that. And we know it, and we appreciate your time and your thought and your support, because without you, we would do nothing. We could do nothing. So Amit, I think you probably have much more to say than me, but I just wanted to say thank you to my colleagues at OVID, and thank you particularly to Luke, to Amit and their teams, who I guarantee you, despite incredible difficulty, have just been superlative and will deliver to you exactly what they promised.
Great. Well, thank you, Jeremy. And thanks for everybody for joining. We have a community that we've been part of only for a short time as OVID, but the community has taught us a lot over the last 5-6 years now, and really has been there for us as we've started our development program with OV101. And I wanted to give the community a little bit of an update about where we are with the OV101 program, because we're in what we call phase 3 start of development. And for those of you not familiar with the kind of medicine development process, it sometimes can seem long, but it is methodical. It is a way that we can ensure that not only that a medicine is efficacious and will work, but also safe, and also you're able to tolerate it. So it does seem to be a bit of time, but actually we've progressed from that one early study, which is the PK study, which for some of you have participated in adolescents, along with our STARS, which is our phase 2 program, and currently at Neptune, our phase 3 study. So maybe I'll give you a little bit of an update just historically what's happened with our program, so that for those of you who are new, can have a sense of where we are and what the next steps might be. Currently, we have completed the STARS program, and the STARS was a phase 2 study. And when you look at phase 2 studies, phase 2 programs are often smaller studies that look at a population of people who may potentially benefit from a proposed medicine. And this study was completed with probably larger than a typical phase 2 study, with 88 people who were enrolled, adolescents and adult participants who had Angelman syndrome. And when we did that study, it was primarily done in the US with 13 sites, of which one of them actually was in Tel Aviv at Sheba Medical Center. And what we found with that study, we looked at 3 different, I would say, cohort arms of the program, which was 2 active drug arms. There was a twice-a-day arm and a once-a-day arm, and then there was a sugar pill arm, so there was no therapy there. And so, and we looked at that data, we we concentrated on not just a specific measure, but looked at totality measure. And the measure that we looked at is called the Clinical Global Impressions, or CGI, of improvement. And what this measure does is it looks at an individual and compares their course of therapy from their baseline when they enter the study to when they actually complete the study. And that study was 3 months long. And what the CGI does is able to capture a totality of a person's being, whether it is their symptoms around behavior, communication, motor function, sleep, and compare it to their baseline status. This is something that we looked at because of the heterogeneity. It's so different from one person to another, as you may know, that people who have Angelman syndrome, you may have the same genetic defect or same molecular change that's causing the Angelman syndrome manifestations, but outwardly it could be very different. Some people have sleep issues, some people don't, some people are able to walk, some people need more assistance. And so those are very important when we look at people with individuals with Angelman syndrome, is to ensure that we're actually looking at the totality of a person's manifestations of the condition. And the ones that we focus in are ones that you as a community have told us are important to you. So when we look at the condition, we can look at multiple areas, but what we focused on is sleep, behavior, motor function, communication as the primary areas that we look at for the areas of improvement or change. So with the STARS program, what we found was that of the people who enrolled in the program, the once-a-day arm of OV101 showed what we call statistically significant change. That means a change that looks like is an improvement that's not happening by chance alone. And that's important because as we look at clinical trials and how we develop medicines for approval, we want to look at whether something's happening by chance or whether there is a real effect there. And with our methodology that we use, which is called biostatistics, showed that there was a difference that was meaningful between the once-a-day and sugar pill arms. And of course, this is a phase 2 study, so that means it's somewhat exploratory in those efficacy measures, but we wanted to take that forward. In addition to that, we did look at the safety and tolerability profile. From a safety perspective, what you see with OV101 are more likely GI type symptoms. So it could be some gastrointestinal upset, sometimes a stomach upset, sometimes a queasiness or nausea that's manifested, or you can see sometimes just a little bit irritability. We're further looking at that, but all of those seem to be very transient and very mild. So from a safety and tolerability perspective, the STARS data gave us confidence that we were moving with a dose and a regimen that was acceptable to people with participants in the study, as well as a signal for efficacy. Another thing to note for those of you who are not familiar with the OV101 program is that this compound was previously studied in a large studies for people with insomnia, so adults with insomnia. And so backing up our safety and tolerability information is more than 4,000 what we call patient years of data that really supports the safety information that we have, and is very consistent with what was seen in those studies that were done previously. So given the STARS information, which we are in the process, we presented that information, and for those of you who are looking for the manuscript, it's in process and hopefully will be published soon. But we did take that information to the regulatory authorities, and specifically we went to the US FDA with that information. It's important to also know that, as you know, that there are no specific treatments that are indicated for people with Angelman syndrome. Much of the therapies that we do have are supportive or look at symptoms, but not the totality of illness that we would like to look at, or totality of the condition. So with the STARS information in hand and with the information from our PK study, we actually looked forward to what we call a phase 3 study, which is a true study that looks at efficacy as well as safety. And this is called a pivotal study because this is a study that is actually prepared for potential registration. So potentially moving down a path that this would ultimately become approved and be able to be used as potential medicine in the future. So the Neptune study was evolved from that from the data that we had from STARS. So STARS looked at adults and adolescents, but we heard from the community that we should really look at younger ages as well. And so the Neptune study looks at younger populations. So the age groups that are enrolled in Neptune are primarily 4 to 12 years of age. 4 to 12 years of age. However, there's a small group of 2 to 3-year-olds who are not doing efficacy assessments per se, but really just looking at their PK profile, which means how the drug reacts in their blood or how it's metabolized in their body. So there's only about 5 people who are being enrolled in the 2 to 3-year-old population, but really it's about taking OV101 and then understanding how quickly the drug is removed from the body. So there's multiple blood samples that are done to take a look at how the metabolism happens for OV101 in a younger age population, because younger ages have different maturity of their organ systems, and they're not just young adults, they're actually, they have very different systems that and levels of maturity for their organ system. So it's important to understand that at the 2 to 3-year-old age group. But going back to the main study is 4 to 12 years old. There's 2 different arms. There's a placebo group, which is the sugar pill. So it's no active therapy or treatment, versus the once-a-day arm. And the once-a-day arm is OV101 given at bedtime. The dosing is different depending on your weight, as well as age. But as younger ages have lower weights, the dosing is slightly different than at a higher age where you might be a little heavier. And so we adjust the weight until you get to a point where you're 12, 13 years old and above 65 kilograms, where you're able to tolerate the adult dose. So that's built into the protocol, that there's different doses given based on the weight. The study is 3 months long, similar to what the STARS program was. We do look at some baseline measures. For example, we will look at sleep. And so part of the study actually looks at actigraphy, which is a device that you wear. And it can be a watch, but it can also be a clip that's put on to the hip to monitor sleep. We had some really good feedback and experience from the people who participated in STARS about how difficult it was to hold on at the watch to measure sleep throughout the entire study. So many people gave us very creative ideas. Thank you very much for those, about where to put the watch or the device. So ankles are typically a place that we do that, as well as potentially on the hip as a clip. And when we do that, we can actually get that information around sleep. And in the Neptune study, you don't have to wear the device the entire duration of the study. It's only for 3 specific time points at the screening visits, where we look at see if you're able to wear it for at least a week or so. And then at baseline, which is when you first come in and you're starting to think about the study, and then there's some baseline assessments. In the middle of the study for a week prior to your week 6 visit, and then again towards the end of the study a week prior to your week 12 visit. So it's less of an effort in wearing the device the entire time, but we do want to capture some of this information because and when you look at how you measure sleep, those are kind of accepted measures of how you can actually assess sleep in an individual. The other parts of the study are there's study visits that occur in the clinic. So whether you're at the baseline visit, which is when you're speaking to your clinician and your study coordinators and understanding about the study, some baseline laboratory measures are taken just to see where you are right when you start the study. Again, at 6 weeks is another in-person visit preferably, and then at 12 weeks, which is the week 12 visit and the last visit of the study. During that time, we asked participants and caregivers to take notes and understand what's going on with their participant who's in the study. And then assessments are made throughout the study. So I mentioned the week 6 and week 12 visits for Neptune, but also we have individual check-in points. Sometimes they're by phone and sometimes they may be by telemedicine to check in on safety and making sure that otherwise things are going well, if there's any questions or concerns, and those happen frequently in between those in-person visits. At week 12, at the last part of the study, people who have completed the Neptune study had the option to roll into the open label extension study, which is called Olara. So this study is a long-term understanding of how people tolerate OV101. It also looks at some different measures, the same measures that we'll kind of carry through, which is the CGI, which I mentioned previously, looking at the totality of a person's effect with the compound. Just remember, in the Neptune study, half the people are on sugar pill and half the people are on active OV101. But once you complete, everybody who chooses to roll into Olara, it's optional for you, but everybody who chooses to roll into Olara will get the active OV101 compound in the evening and adjusted to whatever dose that is appropriate for their age and weight. Just to also say that we are looking at enrolling 60 initially. We've increased that size of this study to 90 participants. We were well on our way to completing our enrollment when the COVID situation happened, but also we had feedback from Europe that recommended we add some additional analyses to our study. And from a statistical perspective, which I mentioned previously, which is important in understanding whether things are happening by chance or real effects, from a statistical perspective, it made sense to increase the size of our study so that we can address some of the additional requests or recommended requests and changes from the European regulatory authority. So we went up to with our size of our study from 60 to 90. So we're still continuing to recruit that study. This study is being conducted a little bit more broadly than US and Israel, which we did with STARS. Currently, we are enrolling sites in the US, Israel, Australia, Germany, the Netherlands, and potentially Italy, if potentially they may be coming on board in a couple of weeks. So we are very encouraged by the fact that our European colleagues and communities have been able to express interest. Specific cities are the Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam, in Munich, University of Munich, Milan, Tel Aviv, as I mentioned, and there's multiple cities in the US. So for more information, if you're interested in the program, you can go to the angelmanstudy.com website, which many of you already know about. But for those of you interested in learning a little bit more about what I've spoken about for the Neptune study, angelmanstudy.com is where you could find some additional information, at least for US folks, may also direct you to a questionnaire that would direct you to your closest site if you're interested. When do we expect our data? So we're confident that our data will be available by the end of the year. We've said the fourth quarter. So the fourth quarter is sometime October, November, or December. It's a little difficult to say right now exactly what timing it is because we're still continuing to recruit into the study. But our recruitment is expected to complete by the summer. So this is June. So sometime between June, July, August, we would expect to complete our recruitment into the program because that gives you the window of having your screening visits done plus your 3 months of treatment so that we can able to complete the study and have data at the latest in December. As we are looking to present data for our Neptune program by the end of the year, we also hope to have our initial data from the Olara program, which is our long-term extension program, available shortly after. This information is compiled from people who have either completed STARS and chose to roll into the Olara program, or our PK adolescent PK study, and then chose to enroll into the Olara program. People who've completed Neptune, and they can enroll into the Olara program. And the additional folks that can enroll into Olara are siblings of people who have completed Neptune. So typically in a clinical trial, we don't have two people from the same family in the study. So it's the older child or preferably, or if there's some other reason not to, one of the children would be enrolling into the Neptune program, but by the end of the study, any person who has Angelman syndrome from that family could roll into, any sibling could roll into the Olara program. What Jeremy mentioned a little bit earlier was the impact of COVID-19 on the conduct of the study itself. It's been challenging, as you know, and definitely our hearts go out to anybody who's been affected by COVID-19. This was also challenging for us, just because we wanted to make sure that people who were in the study or had interest in the study could continue in the trial, as well as enroll if they wanted to. So we did some measures to really address and try to make it a bit more simple to participate. Some of the things that we did implement are telemedicine visits. So instead of going to the site for each visit, some of the visits now can be done by telemedicine. So speaking to your clinician for this study or the site coordinator. We've also started to implement local laboratories for people who can't travel in and have to have, for example, blood work checked as part of the protocol. So the ability to use local laboratories as well. And then we've also implemented ways to ship drug directly to individual caregivers to their home, so they don't have to come in for refills. And so that's been organized by the team. So it's a very strict process about how we actually ship investigational medicine. That's very well kind of monitored, but that also has been something that we've implemented for folks so that they don't have to travel as much. For those of people who are traveling and who have to do the in-person visit, because the week 6 and week 12 visits, as well as the baseline, are preferably all at in the center. We do support travel. So if you have questions about travel and support for you, your loved one who's participating, as well as the family members who need to be present there, just speak to the sites and the coordinator. They should be able to access the way we're actually supporting travel for the program itself. So we're very excited with that the community has shown such enthusiasm for the program. I'm also excited about all the other programs that are out there. I think it's an amazing time for the community to have all the potential options and potential new therapies. Where is this evolving to? I think we're very happy that potentially we will have a new medicine for Angelman syndrome soon, depending on what the data shows. But then ultimately, how does this evolve and really impact you? It's going to be your feedback, your kind of support that you've provided already as this comes forward and as new therapies come forward and as different approaches, combination therapies and others come forward as a way to really change the overall kind of treatment practice in Angelman syndrome. So thank you very much for that. I think right now, we'll take some questions from people either online who have, you can, I think, go to the question box and actually kind of type in a question. And I do have a few questions that came in earlier that I think I addressed most of them, but can maybe also bring Jeremy and Luke back to address any specific areas that we haven't touched upon yet. Luke? Oh, there you are. Oh, but I can't hear you.
Thanks.
Oh,
I'm having trouble accessing the question panel, but as long as you can see them, Amit.
Can I see them? There is no. Okay. Well, okay, I see some. Oh, good question. So I have a question from Lisa, who's, why did we move the single dose arm into the pivotal phase 3 study rather than the double dose arm? It's a great question. So one of the reasons we looked at dosing in our phase 2 study is really to understand what was the right dose to move forward. So that's why we looked at 2 different doses in the phase 2 study. We looked at a twice-a-day arm as well as a once-a-day arm. When we looked at the information, it looked like it was the once-a-day arm that was the effective dose of that study that we moved forward. And the twice-a-day arm has I would say, a peculiar kind of effect that's well known with this type of compound, with this type of drug, that when you have too high a dose, you start to develop tolerance. And so what happens with Angelman syndrome, as you know, is a lack of one of the inhibitory neurotransmitters in the brain, the chemical messengers of the brain, where if there's not enough of that as called GABA, that you may have some of the manifest symptoms that you see with the condition. And so when we look at replacing that level of GABA, that the once-a-day arm hits the right level. Once you go above that, what happens is your receptors that are responding to the GABA starts to what we call internalize, and so you start having paradoxical effects. And so the once-a-day dosing is the way that we wanted to move forward. The twice-a-day dosing really develops what we call tolerance, and that was not something we wanted to move forward.
And Amit, if I can just add to that, this is an extremely common effect with many drugs. And what you want to do is to understand exactly what is the right dose. How does anybody know what the right dose on a pill is, actually? You can learn from animal studies. And the animal studies told us that if you went to a certain level, you'd get a great result. If you went further than that, you'd have not as great result. But you can never be sure what happens in an animal study will translate into a human study. So you want to explore what you can. And what Amit just described to you is actually we were able to find that in our early studies before we got into humans, we were able to replicate very similar things in humans. And as a consequence of that, we know exactly where we want to go on dose. Now that's very good news, because like many studies, they don't do that. Actually, they say this is the dose and you take it. That's not the best way to do it. The most rigorous way to do it is to understand what is the pharmacology. How does that drug work in the real human body? And Amit's team did that specifically. I said to you earlier on, we're very cautious. We wanted to show first safety, which we did. We then wanted to show that we had the right dose, which we did. And then we wanted to see a result from that dose, which we did. So all 3 components, and that leads to Neptune, and that's why you got the answer. I think that's a good way of saying it, Amit. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that, yeah, absolutely. I think that, we see this effect with that once-a-day dose that's being taken forward into Neptune. When you look at, from a clinical trial perspective, because one of the other questions I saw was about, what does that statistically significant mean? When you see the scales that we're using, which is looking at the totality of a person's condition using the CGI, you're seeing almost a 1-point difference, right? It's a 0.8 difference that we see with the once-a-day dosing in the STARS study. And typically with this scale used in clinics, and it's been used in other areas such as depression, such as pain, a 0.5 difference is usually meant to be clinically meaningful. So anything above 0.5 is you take a look at, because it's only a 7-point scale, and you can only improve 3 points, and you can only go worse than 3 points. So a 0.5 point difference is quite clinically meaningful. And here we saw a 0.8 difference with our STARS study, which is a small study in adults and adolescents, but seeing that level of difference is what we have taken forward as some of our assumptions of the Neptune study.
And Amit, I think if I may, I heard you say the word the question was about statistical significance. And I think for everybody on the line, when you run a clinical trial, one of the things that you're trying to do, why do you need more than 1 person? Well, you want to know that clinical trial will have an effect on the vast majority of those individuals. And so statistical significance is a mathematical way of measuring how significant that the medicine has actually had an effect on that population. And the discussion that Amit just had on the endpoint, where he said in STARS we showed a 0.8, an improvement of 0.8. Well, you could say, so what? Well, the improvement said that actually the chances of getting it were 0.00. The statistical significance was extremely high. It was 0.0006. Now you don't get that. That is, the significance is extremely high. Amit, you're a better mathematician than I'll ever be.
No, absolutely. I think I mean, statistics is a lot about probability, and the probability of seeing a difference like that is very low, right? It's because that means the effect must be somewhat real, right? And I think that's another way of kind of interpreting it. So yeah, we're very encouraged by the STARS data, and then that's why we have the Neptune data to really move that forward. Now, one of the things is that we're looking at two different age groups, and one's in STARS and one's in Neptune, but we hope them to be complementary to each other, because when you look at the course of illness for Angelman syndrome, you know, many people who are 4 years old or 6 years old are very, very similar in their condition to someone who is 25 years old in terms of their abilities for walking, or for fine motor control, like buttoning a shirt, or communication or sleep. So that we look at these studies as complementary, but then ultimately it'll be really determined by the regulators how we actually move this forward into indications for how we can use the potential medicine in the future. I was answering another question kind of through that response to you, Jeremy, because there was a question about, you know, about different age groups and do we need additional studies. I think that really depends on once we have the Neptune data, and then we can really determine next steps about that. So thank you to Faye for that question. I think Todd's question I answered, which is about clarifying the statistically significant results and examples. Pedro, I hope you got the video working, but thanks for joining. Are there any plans to enroll in the UK as part of the European study? Right now, all our sites are open in Europe, and like I said, we're aiming to complete recruitment sometime this summer. So right now, there are no plans to open in other countries outside of the ones I mentioned, but we do, you know, support travel if that is of interest. So I would reach out to the sites that are taking participants into the study to see if that's something that you might be interested in, and I will just talk directly with the sites. You know, this is an orphan status within the US, and so a question about how long the FDA approval would be following phase 3 results. It's a great question. Typically, when you look at a submission, which is a new drug application in the US, it can be up to about a year. However, with orphan drug status, sometimes that's shortened. So 6 to 9 months is typical after you've submitted the application. But there are multiple steps to get to the submission of the application. So it also depends on what data we see with Neptune, what other interactions we have subsequent to Neptune with the regulators, how we pull that information together. So that's just typical guidance, is like 6 to 9 months potentially for orphan status, about a year, but that can shift and change. So those are guidelines. What age range is the Olara study? So the Olara study is anybody who's participated in an OV101 trial. So the age ranges for the STARS study was 13 to 49 years of age. The PK study was adolescents. And then the Neptune study is 2 to 12 years of age. So the Olara study then subsequently is 2 to 49 years of age, or a sibling of somebody who's participated in Neptune. There are sites in the US as well as the other sites I mentioned who are in Neptune. Predominantly all of them are participating in Olara as well. The Boston sites are Boston Children's and the site outside, the Chris Carey site near Lexington, which I'm just blanking on the name right now, but Chris Carey and Wen Han Tan in Boston for Karen, I believe, who asked that question. And I think other questions that I'm seeing right now is I think I've answered most of those. So there is a process, I think, once we have Neptune data, that we will speak to regulators in the US as well as other parts of the world. We are not just only focusing on the US. This is a global condition. You're a global community. We are working towards interactions with the European authorities, with Canadian authorities, with Australia, with Israel, with Japan. So we will make this available globally once we have the data, and if that supports moving forward with the registration. I'm just looking at some of the other questions, Jeremy, that are coming through. If someone has COVID, would they be disqualified from the study? You know, the COVID impact is quite significant. Typically, in any sort of study, you don't want any other illnesses happening at the same time because we want you to take care of your illness, and really, I think COVID is a serious illness that will you'd want to, I think, really address before thinking about moving into any kind of clinical trial after recovery. I think that's something that you would speak to your physician about and your clinician about whether this study would be appropriate or not to be something you'd be interested in. There's a lot of questions. I don't know, Jeremy, if you can see them, but there's quite a bit.
No, I can't, unfortunately. Please tell me.
Okay.
You fire them to me, and I'll answer what I can.
Okay. What about children under 2 years of age? So we are not looking at people specifically under 2 years of age right now. That's something we may look at and look towards in the future. But currently, one of the rationales for starting where we were 2 years and above is that most times the clinical diagnosis of Angelman syndrome is somewhere between 18 months to 4 years of age is the average in the literature. So we did go down to 2 years of age as a younger outset. And as people develop and grow, it may be very, we didn't want to introduce a lot of potential growth factors that are coming in between that, newborn to 2 year period, which is a period of rapid growth and development. So initially we're looking at a population that's more childhood, 4 to 12. The 2 to 3 year olds are really only to understand the blood profile, what happens to the compound as it's metabolized in the body. So really we're focused on the 4 to 12 years old, but that's not to say that in the future we wouldn't move into a younger age group as kind of we think about the data. But first we'd want to see what happens with the Neptune study.
I think if I can add to it, one of the philosophies we had when I spoke to the community 4 years ago was very simple. We want to, first of all, ensure that we have a compound that we know that's going to be safe and that can be used. And we had really good reason to believe that it could be used on people over the age of 13. And so we really proceeded with STARS. Once we had the STARS result, the next thing was to say, could we go down to a much younger age group? And we did that. The whole point about this, we know how precious the children are. We know how precious each individual is. And it was essential to us that we not only show that it was effective, but that it was safe, really safe. And so the next step is to go younger and younger. And if we're able to find the ability to understand how that works in these very young little children, and we have the ability to do it, there's a lot of understanding that needs to come, then we are in a position to take the steps as that question implies. I think when in any medicine, the most important thing that you can do is do not harm the individual. And we're very confident now that we've seen some really great safety data for the ages that we have.
Yeah, I'll just, and I think we have a very a profile that's very well tolerated. This compound's well tolerated. The assessment of safety, of course, will come from the regulators once we do submit that, because I think that is something that the regulators will let you know about. But we're very comfortable with the profile that we have emerging with OV101.
Yes, and just to be clear, I'm not making an assertion of safety. I'm simply the profile is that the profile of tolerability is really very well established.
Absolutely, very well established profile, and very encouraged by it. I will read something because I think Eitan can't speak. Eitan Shea, who is texted in from Tel Aviv, and thanks, Eitan. I know we chatted quickly early this morning, but he did say, just to pass this on to you, Jeremy and Luke. I don't have a question, but I would love to get a minute to speak and express the community's thanks and appreciation to OVID for continuing the operation throughout this challenging time. Also sending our care and concern to the OVID staff, wishing you are well, and sending you our warm hugs. Thank you, Eitan, very much. You know, that means a lot, and I'm sure the people listening, and Jeremy, please jump in. Really appreciate those.
איתן, תודה. אנחנו שמח להיות פה, וכיף לי לשמוע את השאלה, ואני מקווה שלבוא לבקר. Folks, for those of you who don't know, I lived for many years in Israel and speak a little bit of Hebrew. So I have a great pleasure of having been there and seen the Angelman community there, also in France actually, and in Great Britain. So I try where I can. My English has got a funny accent to it, but I try to speak the language of the country I go to.
Thanks.
Tell us what you said.
Right back at you. We're constantly thinking about you guys too, and mirroring exactly what you just said. So it's always so wonderful to be in touch with you, and thanks, Eitan, and to the entire community around the world. So yeah, I wish I could see the questions, but I can't. But so you guys know, please do.
A few more here. I'll just mention that Evelyn from Germany. So thanks, Evelyn. I think I answered the question about the FDA kind of approvals, and the EMA timing is still pending. We're still having interactions with the European authorities, so that's more info to come. And thank you also to the French team who reached out. One question specifically about ongoing medicines, for example, Depakote or other medicines that somebody might be on. So as long as you're on a stable medicine for at least 4 weeks prior to enrolling into the study, you continue on those medicines. So Depakote or other anti-epileptics or other medicines that somebody may be on are allowable as long as it's been stable and no changes in the medicines have been made over the last 4 weeks before entering into the study. One question about our OV881 program. To that, for those of you who don't know, is our compound that's looking at a molecular approach to Angelman syndrome. We are looking at a microRNA approach, which is similar but different to some of the other molecular approaches that are out there, addressing the gene itself. That is still in very early research, but we're very encouraged by some of the information that we're seeing there. And we hope to then bring this forward and have an update for the community once we have additional data around the OV881 program. And really what we're trying to build here is not just one approach to therapies within Angelman syndrome community, but multiple. So we're looking at an oral, which is OV101. We have a follow-on, which is OV881 program, and we're always interested in how those combinations or therapies can make really a difference for people living with Angelman. Jeremy, I don't want to kind of add about that.
No. I think it's very important to say that our experience as physicians in over 20 plus more years of finding new medicines is that it's very rare, unless you have an antibiotic, that you cure something. The way to do this, to really bend the curve of any kind of disorder, is to find the best approaches and then combine them. Because if you do that, then you can have not just a really good effect to begin with, but you can perhaps have a spectacular effect on long term. And we've seen this time and time again. Doesn't matter what disorder it is. For example, diabetes, very similar. You can really bend the curve there by having a couple different approaches. And even sometimes you have it, even in antibiotics, one antibiotic doesn't work, but when you combine it with another one, boom, you have an effect. So we're really optimistic about that. We're planning ahead. We're hoping that OV101 will have a very significant effect. And we're hoping that if we are successful in it, it will be something that others who are developing other types of therapies will be able to look at it in combination as well. So it's very exciting actually, because the minute you show you can do something, as all of you did working with us in STARS, that you can have an effect, everybody else wants to get in, and it's fantastic because then you can start to really explore different therapeutic modalities.
Yeah, absolutely. Couple other questions. So we're not opening additional sites right now. The assignment of randomization is random, so it's 1-to-1 randomization. So we have the placebo arm and the treatment arm in Neptune. It's a random assignment, so we don't know, the clinicians don't know, you don't know about what treatment group is assigned until the end of the study when the data is complete. It's the Lurie Center. Thank you, Jim, for telling me in Massachusetts that Chris Carey's site. That's the other site there. And I think some of the changes that we see, that what does the CGI mean? I mean, that's a really good question. So a 0.8 difference, what does that translate into? And I think that's why we're looking at other measures such as sleep, such as where we see improvements on, for example, the ability to get to sleep and stay asleep. We see changes in behavior, which are picked up as either from comments by the clinicians that we worked with for STARS, attentiveness, attention may be improving. So we don't know any of the changes in Neptune yet because that's still an ongoing blinded study. But from the STARS information, we have some insights into what some of those changes are, specifically around sleep, specifically around center of balance for motor function, specifically behavior and ability to be more kind of aware in the environment. Those are all things that we'll be assessing in the Neptune study as well, to get a better understanding of that. Usually, oh, go ahead.
No, if I was just going to add, in every clinical trial, you have to have a measure. And it's a measure. And when you look at that measure, the question is, what does it tell the family, and the clinician? And the one measure we took, CGI, is a measure which has been around actually for 30 years. And just for your information, we've just published a whole series of papers at the American Academy of Neurology, one of which deals specifically with the question that you're asking. But from our perspective, when you have every cell in the brain that's affected, you need to have something that doesn't just say, oh, I walk a little bit better. Oh, I sleep a little bit better. Oh, I talk a little bit. Those are good, okay? You want to be able to capture the totality of the changes, because for us, a human being has a total change, okay? It's very important. You want to, each individual may change slightly differently, but you want to be able to capture all of the changes, not just a little bit, something that says, I can walk a little better, which is good, don't get me wrong, it's very good. But if you have a medicine that's going to affect an individual, what is the measure for the totality? Well, the best possible measure, we believe, is CGI. That allows you, with the work of the physician, to be able to assess these different, what I call domains. Domains is, movement is a domain, conversation is the domain, behavior is a domain, sleep is a domain. Each one of these is a different thing. And in order to get a change in all of them, we have a measure, but it does a sort of mathematical summation of all of these different things and comes to a point. And when Amit said that 0.5 is clinically significant, what that means is that the medicine has had a very significant effect across multiple different areas, and suddenly you see a change. And these changes will be apparent to you the second you see them. It could be that somebody is communicating better, and that they're sleeping better, and that they're walking better. All of these will come together for that individual in their own particular way, because we know that each one of the children, each one of the individuals is actually different. You can have 3 children in the same family, and interestingly, with the same mutation, and they all have different characteristics. So you don't want something that's a cookie cutter that says they walk a little bit better. You want something that captures everything. And Amit and the clinical design team spent a bunch of time talking to clinicians, to families, and to other experts to ask, what is the best way of looking at this? And locked down on CGI. Now, it's a scale. Every single physician who you've worked with will know what that scale is. And a 0.5 movement on that means that there's been a big budge. Now, just for your information, more than 60% of the people who had a positive effect in the STARS trial. More than 60% had multiple areas changing: sleep, behavior, movement, had multiple areas changing. So it's no one thing. And I think it's important to have that kind of a measure to capture the fact that every single cell in the brain has had some impact, and it'll be different as the child develops over time, and they get different types of teaching, different types of education. You want to be able to treat that brain incredibly sensitively and have a very sensitive measure that says, okay, we get it, but we're going to make it simple for everybody. It's a 0.5, and that's good. I mean, am I captured it correctly?
Yeah,
My wife asked me to explain it frequently.
Yeah, I know. I think it's a totality, right? That we're looking at the totality of all the symptoms that that is part of Angelman syndrome, not just one specific domain. So that having that scale is helpful, especially since it's been used in other areas and well used in other areas. And that kind of difference that we saw in STARS, if that continues with Neptune, we'll be very encouraged and that move that forward into the next steps, which would hopefully be registration. So hopefully we'll. So for those of you, I think I answered most of the questions. If I didn't answer your question, we will get responses back to you. Please, or if you have specific questions about Neptune, feel free to reach out to us or direct it to the clinical sites. I know the European sites aren't on that angelmanstudy.com. I just saw that from somebody, so we can help you connect to those places, as well as if you participated in STARS, that information should be available to you. So if you were in STARS and don't have for example, which group you were randomized into, your clinical site will know and should have that information, and they can reach out to us to get that information for you. And in terms of the availability of this webcast, maybe Luke, is this being hosted somewhere that I'm going to turn this over to you? But I'll just say thank you for everybody for joining in and all the great questions that were asked. And if there's anything further, feel free to definitely reach out to us. Luke, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Jeremy.
Can I just say one thing? I really, really, really want to thank Amanda. You've organized something wonderful, and I really appreciate every single thing that you're doing. I love the concept of the clinics that you're pulling together. I think that as you develop this and as we work with you and everybody in the community, we commit to you again. Please understand, we deeply commit to you. We are here, we're going to stay here, we're not going anywhere. And as you walk through this, thank you so much for your patience. I know it seems long. Well, we're talking months away from seeing whether we're there. And if we are, then we're going to celebrate because of you.
Yes, and just echoing those words, thank you so much to the Angelman Syndrome Foundation and FAST, the global community, everybody for just being here and for doing all you do. And ASF and Amanda will have a recording of this to send out a link to those who weren't able to see it. And also, you guys have my email address, so please do reach out with questions, and we'll try to, while I couldn't access the questions here, what we'll try to do is anything that didn't get answered, we'll try to address it in maybe in a one-pager and send that off to the community, so everybody does have a chance to have those answers. And again, if there's anything at all we can do, please reach out.
And Luke, I think if they don't have your email address, they can also reach out to, is it info or using clinical at ovidrx.com?
Yes, you can. Well, I'll put my email address in the chat here because I do have chat, which is lrosen@ovidrx.com. And also, just in case that's too hard to grasp, Amit is right. It is there's info@ovidrx.com. Thank you all very much, and I think we can end the webinar now. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful.
Thanks, everybody. Stay well.
Thank you. Bye.